Welcome to our weekly Church on the Rock podcast. For more information, visit us at churchak.org, download our Church on the Rock AK app, or like us on our Facebook page. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy our weekly podcast.
There's a new hero in town. Nope, not that guy. Nope, not him. Not that guy. He's a hero with a dad bod. This father figure may not have six-pack abs, but he's got something even better. A heart of gold. He may love donuts, but he goes nuts for his family, whether it's helping with homework or saving the day. So don't let the dad bod fool you. Real dads are the true heroes, both inside and out.
So that just happened. Well, hey, everybody, it is so good to be here and to serve a God this morning who reigns above it all. Amen. Even your dad bod reigns above it all. Hey, I'm Jonathan. I serve with Pastor Jonathan Walker, campus pastor of this church, lead pastor, Church on the Rock, for those of you who don't know me. And it's just my privilege to kick us off into a new series on Father's Day. And man, we've been celebrating fathers all day already, but fathers, you are the leaders of society in so many ways, the leaders in your home. You don't get all the respect you probably deserve. We just want to say today that we're celebrating you. And when I say that, and this is absolutely fundamental and critical, when I say that we're celebrating fathers, that doesn't diminish mothers. It doesn't diminish children. It just simply highlights that we acknowledge that fatherhood is to be celebrated. Are you with me? And so what we're going to do to celebrate that is kick off this new series called Dad Bod. And we're going to do it unapologetically, so buckle up. We're going to talk about masculinity. And as soon as I heard that I was kicking the series off, I wasn't entirely sure why they wanted me to kick the series off. I do not fit the typical description of a masculine male, especially from the Alaska definition. However, I absolutely embrace my masculinity, whatever that is. We're going to talk about it, right? And hopefully, I have an audience with you in terms of being able to discuss this, get this, out loud. We're going to talk about it out loud. We're going to get into it, and we're kicking off today, but we're going to get into it for the next 4 weeks. Are you ready? I mean, we're going to talk about this for 4 weeks, and one of the reasons is we've done some research. We've discovered that this is just something people aren't talking about anymore. It's like it's dangerous or it's been hijacked. Well, we're going to reclaim it. We're going to redeem it. We're going to renew it. We're going to bring it back to center stage for the next 4 weeks. So invite your friends, tell your neighbors. It's a discussion, I think, that is pertinent to the situation that we're experiencing today as men and as a society. And we believe that masculinity is as important now as it has ever been. In fact, maybe it is more important than it has ever been. A good, clear definition of masculinity. So, you know what? We got one applause over here. I don't know why we can't keep that going. It's what we're doing today, okay? Now, here's the thing. When it comes to masculinity, and redeeming masculinity, or even just the discussion itself, it doesn't take long before you realize that the discussion has changed over time. I mean, the reason that we want to talk about this is, as I stated, attitudes have changed. Things have shifted over time, starting really probably in the 70s, but continuing on into our days. And really in the last decade, it feels like this conversation has really heightened the pitch, the temper, all of it's really, really heightened. And now we're confused. We're not 100% sure what a woman is. We're not 100% sure what a man is. What we really aren't certain of is if it even matters, which is troubling. What's really replaced clarity, by the way, that's existed for thousands of years and in cultures all over the world to this day. In the West, where we live, that clarity has been eroded and a certain kind of confusion has replaced it. An attitude has replaced it, and the attitude is one that we want to address. Now, here's the thing. For years, people on both sides of the issue, we're talking about conservatives, you're talking about liberals, Republicans, Democrats, Christians, psychologists, it doesn't really matter who you're talking about. For years, people have been talking about masculinity using a definition that looks something like this. They describe masculinity in this way, that masculinity is both an identity and a destination. And that's important. We're going to circle back around to that. But masculinity is both an identity, it's a biological issue. We're going to talk about that. But it's also a direction or a destination. It's a place that we go. For instance, we discover this in the scriptures, the Apostle Paul talking to the church in Corinth, dealing with some specific issues there. And he simply calls a bunch of biological males to do what? Stand up and be men. You see, it's not just an identity, it's also a destination. Doesn't really matter where you are on the spectrum. Everybody has essentially talked about it from that vantage point. In fact, if you were to get into the world of sociologists or psychologists or even biologists, you would discover 4 dimensions to sexuality itself. And by the way, to get to masculinity, we have to talk about our sexuality. So here are the 4 dimensions. I'm going to put it up there for you to take a look at. But most people agree there are about 4 dimensions. And some of these words, if you follow the evening news, are familiar to you, but you may not know exactly what they refer to. And it's important as Christians, if we're going to be talking to our neighbors about these subjects, that we know the language. That we don't just have our own language, but actually know the language that people are using. So there's actually 4 elements or 4 dimensions to this quadrant of sexuality, and they're natal sex, what we call biology. Christians are notorious for going towards the biological argument. You were born male, therefore you are masculine, right? There's the natal, and then there's the gender role. Gender role has to do with culture. How does a male function in society? I brought our attention to gender roles a minute ago when I said I don't function like a typical Alaskan male. I want to hunt. I love hunting. I'm not very good at it. I like going hunting, but I've only shot a couple things, right? Those are gender roles. So you have natal sex, gender roles, and then you have sexual identity. This is your view of self. How do you view yourself? And we know in our culture of confusion that there are people who grew up, right, biologically male, and they knew it. But when they thought about themselves or when they think about themselves, they actually think from a female perspective. And then there's the final one, sexual orientation. Who am I attracted to? If you were to divide all these up, you could see biology, right, natal, biology. This is how you were born. This is how you're wired. You could see an identity, psychology. And if you're in the school of psychology, you're going to start to focus primarily on identity. And then the 2 bottom ones, gender role and sexual orientation, are really sociology. These are sociological factors. The environments that I grow up in inform me sexually, positively or negatively. Now, these are the 4 dimensions. These are the 4 dimensions. But when it comes to these dimensions, what we're looking for, what we're hoping for in the conversation is consistency or congruence, right? That the way I was born, the wiring that I received at birth, carries through into each dimension. That I am man, both in my sex, but also my role and my identity and my orientation. And that was for years and years and years considered normative. But today, all of these are being pieced apart, divided out, and we're suggesting that what's normal is for everything to be disrupted. Fill in the blank. Whatever part of the quadrant you want to move towards, right, is okay. And this is really reflective in a society that now has a negative attitude towards masculinity. I've been getting into AI a little bit, I'm sorry. Just going to get it out there. And so I've been like testing the machine, And so I said, describe for me what a male is in American society today. Here's some of the words that I came up with using this platform. There were negative descriptors like this: toxic, patriarchal, misogynistic. And there were some positive descriptors for men as well. In fact, look at these. These are also familiar. Macho, stud, He-Man. I haven't heard that one in a while, but I'm like, okay, AI said it. Must be true. Dude bro. Paul has definitely said that before, right, Paul? And my personal favorite, badass. These are some of the descriptors. AI said it. I didn't. All right. But here's what's missing. Here's some descriptors for men that I personally think are important that aren't a part of any of the descriptions that I could find anywhere about men. How about noble, intelligent, dignified, or safe? See, not even the computer can come up with these things anymore. We live in a culture of confusion. So what I want to do is I want to talk about it. And today, I'm just stepping in. We got 4 weeks to go. Hang in there. I'm not going to answer all your questions. What I do want to do is build a framework, some sense of a foundation, some solid ground where we can launch from for the coming weeks, okay? And here's the deal. When it comes, and not everybody understands this. In fact, if you're sitting on the edge of Christianity looking in, you're not so sure if you're even wanting to be in this conversation or where you stand in all of this, this is the right day for you to show up. But here's the thing. What you have to understand about Christians and Christianity in general, at least Bible-believing Christians, is when it comes to these issues, we aren't actually taking our cues from the four edges of the quadrant. We're taking our cues from God. In fact, we'll just say it like this. When we enter this discussion, we always begin with God. Say it with me. We begin with God. That's who we begin with. He is our starting point in the discussion. And we believe, unashamedly so, we have good reason, good cause to believe that we should begin with God, specifically when it comes to our sexuality. We're going to get there, but there's one place in Romans I want to take you to first. It kind of foreshadows where we're going, and it's Romans chapter 1. Listen to this. This is why we believe we should begin with God. For that's God's invisible attributes, that is his eternal power and divine nature, that's a lot of God, have been clearly seen, and since the creation of the world have been understood. See, we believe we should begin with God because we believe there's evidence for God. And if God exists, and if he is who he says he is, he has a say in the matter. And there's a benefit for those who pay attention. So we begin with God. But here's another reason. We begin with God because what we've discovered is that behavior, you ready? Behavior, this is important. Behavior is attached to reward. What we've discovered in our lives as Christians, as believers, is that behavior is always attached to some form of reward. For instance, when I got married to my wife, 23 years in July, by the way. Yeah. Married to my wife, what we believed is what the Bible said. What we believed is that if we maintained our purity towards marriage, that it would be a blessing to us. And then on that marriage bed night, we realized the fullness of the blessing. We believed before we got to 23 years that if we were faithful to each other and loved each other from the heart and that I treated her like the vows said that I should treat her and she treated me like the vows said she should treat me, that what would happen is not just longevity in marriage, but it would be a marriage filled with the glory of God. Now, what we believed 23 years ago, we have experienced today. It's the reward. Reward comes after faith. Behavior is attached to reward. The biblical illustration of this I always take people to is Psalm 1, where it says that if we don't walk with the counsel of the wicked, but if we actually stand with God in this life, that the blessing on our lives will look something like, it says, a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season. When we obey God, reward is attached. The question is, what kind of life do you want? The reality is you have to believe, then you can obey, and then you can experience reward in that order. And sometimes it takes time, and that's what makes it so hard. But you get the principle. We've all experienced the principle. Behavior is attached to reward. Another way to say that is this, perhaps. If we were to put this into a principle form, the quality of your behavior can be measured by the results it produces. There are observable, tangible evidences for whether or not your behavior is good or bad. Do you agree? It's observable. It's testable. In other words, if behavior precedes reward, then this is true, right? We can actually determine the quality of our behavior if there is no reward. If human flourishing is not the result of our behavior, we should ask some questions. Why am I not flourishing? Why does this not feel good? Why is this not producing what I intended it to produce? So it's just a principle of life, but it's a principle that we believe calls us to once more begin with God. But there's a third reason. There's a third reason that we begin with God, and that's because when we look out there on the landscape, we believe there is a significant problem with the naturalistic model, the psychological, sociological, biological model, the scientific model people use to define masculinity. And it's simply this: it isn't durable. The way that they define masculinity hinges on culture. And if you know anything about culture, it's constantly changing. If my definition of what male is attached exclusively to culture, then it must change with culture. And we can see this. Back to AI. I typed this into AI. I said, if you could define what a male is in our society, right? If you could define it, what would a male be defined as? I'm going to skip this slide and go to that next slide. Here's what AI said. If you skip forward just a couple here, guys. Here we go. Here's what AI said, or ChatGPT. If I had to capture the perception of men in American society in a single word, evolving would be an appropriate choice. Isn't that incredible? In other words, right now, the current landscape that we face as men is undefinable. Can't be defined. Why can't it be defined? Because the naturalist has a problem with how they come up with their definition. They've attached it to culture, and culture is always moving. It's never static. It's not durable, and because it's not durable, it's undefinable. If it's undefinable, guess what? You can't attach expectations to it. We'll get that in just a little bit. So we're left with confusion. So we need to talk about this. We need to know if there's anything durable out there. We need to set the stage for defining masculinity. So what I want to do is I want to take you to two primary texts, two primary passages. One's in Romans. We'll end there, but we'll begin in Genesis. And Genesis is a passage we frequent often in our conversations, especially at the beginning of our series. And it's because it's the beginning, right? And everything hinges on the beginning and God. But here's the thing that's important as we break into Genesis chapter 1 as our starting point. When it comes to the story, the creation narrative as it's called, we need to understand that it was written down by a person. And the person was Moses. And it was written likely on the way to enter the land of Canaan. So Moses has described all of the history leading leading Israel into Egypt for 400 years of slavery, and now all the history of them in the wilderness, and they're about to enter the land of Canaan, where Moses will not be able to enter, but Moses' job is to prepare the children of Israel for entering. And what they will encounter in the land are giants, right? What they will encounter in the land is trouble, and they're going to have to take possession of the land. Now, in that context, in that environment, what do the children of Israel need to succeed? That is always on Moses' mind. Just like a father looks at his family and says, what do I need to be for them to succeed? Moses sits down as a patriarch over Israel, essentially, and he says, what are the things, what is the story, the aspects of the story that they need to understand in order to succeed and carry out the mission that God has called this people to carry out? And it's interesting because what Moses then is trying to undo is detangle Israel from the world and the system of the world. And so much of what we discover in Genesis is brand new information. And what I mean by that is this, picture this. The world has been going now for several thousand years, but there is no written account of God's will for mankind. Are you tracking with me? And in that context, people are going their own direction. You want to find a culture that redefines and redefines and redefines masculinity, it would be this. In other words, everybody in the world was over here, and then Genesis hits. It's in that context, God brings a new idea and calls our attention to it. So we come to the text with that idea, with that mindset. There's a model God wants to surface for the good of Israel to be able to do the thing that he's called them to do. There's a model for you here too, as well. And so here's the model, and we get into it in Genesis chapter 1, and it's the story of God and his creation. Essentially, God has created the earth, he's created the heavens, he's created all the creepy crawlies, the animals, and all of these kinds of things. And then we get to God's crowning statement of his creation, where he engages in creating man. As Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, it says this, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all the things, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.'" Notice rulership is linked with manhood. Not just manhood, but mankind. We'll get to that more. He goes on and says this, "Then God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created him." Now, what is this saying? This is important. Many scholars have pointed out what maybe you saw on the screen, right? And it's this. God created man in his own image. It's the image of God that we're talking about. Whatever we are is an imprint of God. Whatever we are is a representative of the nature of God. Whatever we are. That's what we are. We represent, we're an image. In the Old Testament, you had this idea of idolatry. What was an idol? An idol was an image. What did the idol represent? It represented the God behind it. What are we? We're never to craft idols. Why? Because we are God's representative. We are to represent. So it's all about image. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created singular, him. However, this is the word Adam or Adam. He created Adam. But this is not really singular. The word is translated elsewhere, mankind. He created the man or mankind. And what comprises man? What comprises Adam? Well, it's interesting. Male and female, he created plural, them. In other words, there's something happening here in the Hebrew that Moses wanted everybody in Israel to understand. Look, Adam or man or mankind is two parts. And the two parts are sexuality defined. They are male, and they didn't call them names, called them by their biology. They are male and female. What is mankind? Mankind is male and female. In other words, sexuality is distinct, male and female, but also harmonious. He created them. Them after what? The image. Both are divine representatives of the image of God. Now, this is so critical. This is so important because both of them are also called to the same vocation, rulership. There's something about God and his rule that he now extends to the man and the woman that he has just created. You are supposed to be like me in this area, and you are supposed to cooperate like I cooperate. Let us make man in our image. Mankind, singular, is plural, male and female. There's this relationship account. There's this distinction between sex, but also this harmonious nature between sex. The two distinctions are supposed to drive towards a new picture, a new image of unity. Now, it's interesting to me because when we think about, so what is it that makes the man or brings out the masculine? What is it that does that? We go to certain images, don't we? Especially as guys. I talk for the guys here for just a minute. We go to certain images of manhood, like D-Day. It was the men who stormed the beaches of D-Day. Like war brought out masculinity. And we define masculinity in that respect sometimes. But here's what's so interesting about this. What is really being said here is profound. That if you want to know what brings out masculine more than all of God's creation, more than his vocation, look no further than woman. Do I need to say that again? If you want to know what brings out the man, what brings out the masculine, what defines masculine greater than all of creation, and even greater than his vocation, rulership, look no further than woman. Shannon and I have experienced this numerous times. There are certain things that I would not know apart from my relationship with woman. There are certain feelings I would not feel apart from relationship with woman. There are certain achievements I could not achieve apart from my relationship with woman. There's something about woman that brings out the man. And by extension, there's something about the man who stays man and who does not try to be anything other than man that brings out the woman. And the distinctiveness is meant to be a harmonious experience in relationship. And this is called good. God just says, this is my statement on this, what I have done. It's good. Now, don't mess with it. It's good. It's good. It's good because it's good for you. It's good because it allows you to accomplish your objective. It's good because it does the thing that I asked you to do, be image bearers. That's why it's so good. Now, the surrounding context mentions a lot of other things about masculinity. We got 4 weeks to cover this. I'm not going to get into all of them. But there's some things that emerge, right? Like you could dig into this text and you could find that there's something about nobility and masculinity. Crown jewel of all creation. This is rank. And there's something about that is attached to masculine, nobility, mastery. Adam and Eve, by the way, but Adam, I want you to cultivate this garden. I want you to do it skillfully. There's something about creativity here. All of these things represent God in creation and help Adam and Eve to rule. And all of them are essential to masculinity. But the most interesting one to me, the only one I'm going to cover here in addition to woman, is this idea that masculine means aggressive. Masculine is an aggressive thing. Now, as I say that, I just want to say for just a minute, that this is not exclusive to men. That if Adam and Eve are called to rule, aggressive should come out of both in some sense. But there's something about masculinity that must have aggressiveness in it. Why? Why do I say aggressiveness is in there? Or as some have said, men are dangerous. Why is it that that can be found here in this text? Well, because God places Adam and Eve into a garden, and the garden is not a safe space. Because what do we find lurking in the middle of the garden? Satan himself. You see, one of the reasons God creates man is for war. There was already an eternal cosmic conflict. And as he creates man, he is leveraging an inferior to fight a battle against a superior enemy. But he is leveraging mankind to help him fight Satan. Satan had been thrown down to earth, but Adam is now to reclaim authority. There's something about the DNA of a man that is built for war, built for battle, built for aggressiveness, not built for passivity. The irony of today's culture, men, is that you'll sit down and you'll play a video game that is aggressive, but you don't know actually how to be aggressive. But danger is part of masculinity. It doesn't take very long to go backwards in time to realize that cultures have embraced this. The idea of a knight or a gentleman is all about a man who can be gentle with the children, but can kill his enemy quickly. There's something about masculinity there that we have to discuss and we have to tease out further. But there's something unexpected here, and it's critical in the narrative, and it's discoverable in verse 8. The Lord God planted a garden towards the east in Eden, and there he placed the man. There he placed the man. Why is that significant? Because there he placed sexuality, the man, in his identity, fully equipped to rule, and yet there is no culture. There's only garden. He's snipping the roses. There's no culture. Where's the society? Here's why that's significant. The man in his identity is not attached to culture. It is attached to what? Image. As a result, it's timeless. When Moses sits down to write, what he wants Israel and the men in Israel who are preparing for war to know is that God had created them specifically for a specific experience of life and a specific rule, and that rule was not to be determined by the cultures of the land or the place where they had come from. It was to be determined by how God had created them to be. So he gave them a timeless identity. You're a man. You're a man. You're a man. And don't seek to be anything else other than a man, because God called it good. So why isn't this more visible in our society? And why doesn't this teaching make it out there in the evening news? Have you ever wondered? Like, what is it? Because it seems like a man properly placed and a female properly placed benefit, bless each other, their children, and society at large. Well, I think there's a number of reasons. One, there are truly toxic men. We don't always present well the image of God. So somebody described it to me like this. They said, what a man must be to be dangerous and a gentleman is harnessed. There needs to be a bit in his mouth. You say, what does that mean? Well, the other day I went riding with my daughter, and I just want to skip ahead and show you this picture here. I went riding with my daughter. There's Olivia, and so we actually rode some horses together. I grew up with them, but my family hasn't, and so this was a neat opportunity. I've done this with each of my daughters. So here we are, yesterday riding. I'm incredibly sore as a result. It was a 2-hour journey through the woods. And here's what we did. We went through creeks, and we went up mountains, and we went down mountains, and I didn't sweat once. And do you know why? Because of the power of the animal. Harnessed. Leveraged for good. As a result, it was an effortless trip. It was a vacation through the woods. It was a beautiful experience. But an unharnessed wild beast, I could never control all of that power. And that's what it's got to be. Men are toxic because they're unbridled in their passions. But if we could bridle our passions, maybe we could be an advantage. But there's another reason. There's another reason that is found in the scriptures while we don't see this teaching on the evening news. And it's a troubling reason at best. And it's discovered in Romans. And Paul is writing to a group of individuals who are in conflict with one another, and nobody can see good in the other person. And so everybody's at war. And at issue here in this context is that the Jewish Christians didn't really believe that the Gentile Christians could experience all the blessings of Jewish Christians, that their behavior didn't necessarily produce reward. By virtue of the fact that they were Gentile, Paul deconstructs, kind of places everybody under sin, and then rebuilds a new theology for them so they can get along, so they can live in harmony, even though there's distinction. But to do so, he describes God's interaction with Gentiles through the years. And he describes it as an experience of his wrath. God has been involved, but he has been involved primarily by standing against the sin of the Gentiles. And so this is what God does. And it says in verse 18, chapter 1, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who," this identifies something about why certain truths aren't maximized in our society and culture. "The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who" what? "Suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because that which is known about God is evident within them, for God made it evident to them." It's interesting. It's not a lack of clarity, nor is it a lack of understanding about what God's will is. Isn't that interesting? That when it comes to the Gentiles and God's interaction with Gentiles throughout history up until this point where Paul writes to the church in Rome, what he's suggesting is they've been under the wrath of God because even though they knew what was right, they did what was wrong. How did they do it? They did it through suppression. In other words, they didn't have some grandiose argument to sort of take the truth and make it look foolish. I don't know if you know this, it's really hard to disprove truth. It's really hard to make the truth look foolish because behavior shows up in reward. So you don't disprove it, you just ignore it. You just keep it from being spoken out loud. You push people to be quiet. You silence. That's the idea here of suppression. You hold back the truth, and as the result, you cloak reality. We don't talk about Bruno. That's what suppression means. Have you felt that influence? Like it's okay for you to believe that, but please don't talk about it. That sounds so reasonable, doesn't it? It sounds so nice and kind. I mean, kindness, it's what we're all about. But there's nothing more unloving than to withhold what is good from your neighbor. Let's untwist and untangle that lie right now, right? That we should suppress something that is good. That we should withhold something that is good. Absolutely not. Fundamentally, no. How? Absolutely not. I almost said hell no, but I didn't. Now here's the result. The result is that as a result of suppression, that we don't just sort of, work our way around the truth, or we're not just starved of truth. It's worse than that. We actually lose sight of reality. Look at verse 21. "For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but look, they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools." And the Bible calls this experience confusion. And that's what's happened with masculinity. It feels like confusion. which is interesting because it identifies the problem with defining things by culture, right? It will only lead to confusion. Listen, no definition means you cannot attach expectation. It is not fair, wives, women. It is not fair to tell a man that he is useless, that he is toxic, when you don't have a definition for masculinity. Actually, it's completely illogical. Amen. The only way you can hold a man accountable in your life is if you have a definition for masculinity. To unhinge the definition from anything durable is to do away with any real legitimate argument to somehow corral men. Are you with me? Can you see it? If you at least had an argument, you could do it, but you don't have an argument. How can you expect worse? Worse. You should expect exactly what you get from men when you don't have a good biblical understanding of masculinity. When they become toxic and misogynistic, you should expect the same and more so without a working, solid, durable definition of masculinity. We have to have a definition to generate expectation. The question is, what's your definition? Well, it's here, I think, that God will rescue us. But the unexpected takes place. Verse 24, here's what happens when men suppress the truth. Instead of stepping in the way we think he would, this is what God does. He gives them over in their lust of their hearts to impurity. You see, he gives them over. This is the craziest thing. Here's what God does. God stands against sin by stepping out of the way. How do you know you're under judgment? When God stops the struggle. When there is no longer any shame. When your conscience has been seared. When you enter that state where you go like, this has never been easier. I've never felt more at peace. That's the moment you know you're under the wrath of God, according to Romans chapter 1. Because his presence is no longer resisting your behavior. And when that takes place, you can profess to be wise. But if behavior is attached to reward, or if behavior is attached to a curse, it will expose itself in time in your life. God stands against sin by stepping out of the way. Why? Because of our principle. The quality of your behavior can be measured by the results it produces. And God knows the measurement is coming. Maybe another way to say it is this. The evidence is the consequence. You remove God from your life, his definition of sexuality from your life, there is a consequence. The consequence is the evidence that God needs. But I believe that the evidence and the consequence is designed for one goal, and it isn't for your destruction. It isn't for the destruction of our neighbors or the destruction of society as a whole. It is designed with one goal, to cause men everywhere to look up. To go, why am I experiencing a fruitless, mundane, tasteless endeavor? Why is life so troublesome and hard? Because what God always does is extend an invitation into that context. To look up. He invites us to see what Moses invited Israel to see. In a context where everything has gone south and the whole world is heading in a different direction, then he speaks. And for those who are willing to listen, blessing. And the ability to achieve exactly what God has destined for you to achieve. Now, here's the thing. If you are a Christian man, I'm going to invite the worship team back to the stage. If you are a Christian man, you are without excuse. Here's what I want to tell you. If you're struggling, if this is something where you have just wondered about and you're just starting your journey, I want to challenge you by just giving you a nudge, a helpful nudge, hopefully in the right direction. And I want to attach it to our original statement. And then I want to take it a little bit deeper. Here's the challenge I want you to see. If masculinity is both an identity and a destination, and it is, guys, be men. If it's an identity and it's a destination, let your identity determine your direction, not the culture you find yourself in. If you want to experience all that God has for you, that's what God would have for you to consider. I know, guys, there's just a whole lot more to say. There's a whole lot more to talk about. Next week, you're going to come back, and Pastor Jonathan's going to take us a little bit further. He's going to exalt Jesus as the ultimate male. You're not going to want to miss out on that. And then we're going to talk about fathers, good fathers and bad fathers, and father wounds. And we're going to invite Aaron Weiser to the stage down from Homer to wrap up this series. And we're going to talk more about some of the things that are happening with fathers nowadays and how to be everything that God created to be and to fulfill your purpose. Guys, you're not going to want to miss the rest of this series. But with this foundation, with this framework in mind, I have one call from the bottom of my heart. Would you investigate? Would you investigate what it means to be male? I did my investigation this week, right? I mean, I checked into AI, so I've got all the answers now. But here's the deal. This isn't just a job for pastors. This is your responsibility. Don't you want to know why you're wired the way you're wired? Don't you want to know the shape of yourself? Listen, every Wednesday, a group of men at this church meets to do that and so much more. Get involved with other men. Be proud to be a man. God made you one. Discover what it means. Read the text and go further than you ever imagined. Let's sing.
Thank you for listening. For more of our podcasts and to discover how you can connect, visit us at churchak.org or download our Church on the Rock AK app from either iTunes or Google Play.